comfortable life is all many people can ever hope for. But even a person with infinite creature comforts can suffer if their entire reality is turned inside out and shattered. And if you found our show, it means you've got either morbid curiosity or heart-wrenching empathy for stories of people losing everything and being shaken to their core. I'm lawyer, writer, and entrepreneur Zach Abramowitz, and I'm the host of Targeted, a show that tells the story of unchecked power going off the rails and ordinary people getting caught in the crosshairs. Speaking of comfort, I want to start our series with the story of Jonathan Taylor, a successful lawyer in the energy sector who lived the kind of life many people might dream about. That is, until a startling revelation about his employer's seedy underbelly changed everything. Jonathan Taylor had a thriving legal career. He worked at top firms like Dentons, representing major oil and gas clients like Shell. Originally from England, his job took him abroad to Egypt, Oman, and beyond. He was loving the expat life. So in 2003, when he saw a half-page job ad in a UK legal magazine featuring a stunning image of the Mediterranean coastline in Monaco, he jumped at the opportunity. The position? Legal counsel for SBM Offshore, a Dutch-based oil and gas company with a history dating back to 1862. Today, SBM operates worldwide, reporting nearly $5 billion in revenue in 2023. Over the next decade, Jonathan climbed the ranks of SBM's legal department. He and his wife settled into an idyllic life in Monaco, raising their children in one of the most luxurious places on earth. Jonathan, thanks for joining us for this conversation today.
You're very welcome.
Can you tell me, when was the last time you can remember feeling like your life was normal?
30th of January 2012.
You've got an actual date.
Yeah. Entirely normal. Yes.
Give me a snapshot of normal Jonathan Taylor.
Driving the zigzagged road between La Turbie and Monaco, where Princess Grace met with her maker. Either looking at the mountains or the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, driving into work, parking with my company car in my company spot, going up on the lift and negotiating contracts, negotiating leases, pop out for lunch, continue working, sometimes obviously travelling, getting on planes and going back up the mountain at the end of the day, where my 3 children, who are locally educated in the local village school, again in La Turbie, and my wife would be waiting. And then do it all over again next 5 days. And lovely weekend, driving off into Italy, 22 kilometres away, to have a nice pizza. Depending on the season, going to the montagnes for the sort of skiing, or going to the beaches, Juan Le Pin, to enjoy the sun. Entertaining friends, having lots of visitors. It was a really enjoyable life. Had a fantastic view from the terrace where I lived. Monaco directly below, Mediterranean straight ahead to the left, or to the east was Italy, and then, of course, to the west was France. It was a good life. It was a good life.
Sounds perfectly pleasant.
It was extraordinarily pleasant. I was very, very fortunate.
So you had been, by January 30th, 2012, you had been at SBM for almost a decade.
Getting on for, yeah. I started as legal counsel and worked my way up. Ultimately was the Deputy General Counsel of the company and the Legal Director of Sales and Marketing. So I had, about a dozen lawyers answering to me across the countries where we had bases and within Monaco. And yeah, it was a good life.
What happened after the day you describe as your last day of feeling normal?
The General Counsel received a phone call from a US law firm, Wilkie Farr, who was then acting for a US super major. There was suspicion that SBM had been using an agent for the paying of bribes. The company was Noble Energy, and a laptop of a former employee of Noble Energy had suggested an individual who was acting as SBM's agent had been distributing bribes by way of cars, property, and in some cases cash, in order to ensure that a contract for the lease of an FPSO by Noble Energy was won by SBM, and he was going around the world left, right, and centre executing bribes which had been initiated and concocted, if you will, by sales and marketing team predominantly in Monaco. And so from that moment on, the sluice gates opened. So we in legal were entirely unaware of the fact that SBM's business model, the bastion of and fabric and DNA of how it did business and win contracts, was through the payment of bribes.
Great sales strategy.
A very successful sales strategy. So officially, I should have smelt a rat when I was given my card on the first few days, and it gave the officers an address in Marly, which is a canton in Switzerland. It's strange. I'm here in Monaco. It turned out that was the registered official head office of SBM for tax reasons, and they had a couple of dozen accountants. And the cost controller, the main man there, determined he was going to give us and gave us a very thick list of payments made to agents over what was the previous 7 years, I believe, was it 5 years, and the amounts totaled in excess of $250 million.
And these were all could be found on the P&L of the company?
This was a printout of the bribes the company had made, but it wasn't, of course, it was entitled agency payments, innocuous term, in order to win contracts. Later, but we're still talking early February now, I was then given a variety of agreements under which the payments were made, and so I was able to a large degree, match up payments made on whatever dates in whatever country for whatever deal with a variety of agreements, agency agreements, the main one that caused the phone call, and then one in Brazil. Others were to offshore companies like in Panama and BVI, often to kleptocrats themselves through companies with bearer shares set up in those sort of jurisdictions.
You've worked with other oil companies. Did you ever suspect that they might be involved with these kinds of arrangements? It almost makes me wonder, like, if any energy company has clean hands, but you'd worked at other energy companies, had you seen anything like this, or were there talks, rumors, whispers? So
let's not forget, the company was formed and originally was based in Switzerland. Up until I think it's as recently as 50 or so years ago, the payment of bribes in Switzerland was tax deductible. It was an entirely normal, almost by virtue of what I've just said, encouraged
account-based marketing
in which to do business. So the trouble was, Mr. Mari, who set up the company, an Egyptian gentleman, carried this on and on and on, and the company never stopped. Things did change. I'm not going to generalize and say yes, bribes are still very much there in the oil and gas industry, and tar with a big brush the entire industry. They certainly were more prevalent than they are perhaps these days, but I think things did change. But SBM didn't, and they continued the payment of bribes, like they did pretty much from day one, back in the 1960s, as far as I can tell, and never really grew up and changed their business practices. And how they thought they would ever get away, it still dumbfounds me to this day. How much further in the future the bribes had to be paid and maintained.
Recurring revenues, as it were.
Right.
And the general counsel then told you?
He literally, I will never forget it, came into my office, shut the door, which is not normally something that happens, sat down and told me about the call he had just had from Wilkie Farr.
What's going through your head?
So I was listening very carefully. I was being provided with information at quite a quick, thick and fast timing in a very short period of time, so that within 2 weeks I had a reasonable grasp of what had been going on in the company for decades, but particularly in the last 5 to 7 years, as per this printout. And like I say, I married out the amounts paid with various agreements the company had entered into. Not a whole lot of time to think, not a whole lot of time to breathe. Suddenly I was earmarked to be on this quasi-committee to try and work out all that I was working out. Bizarrely by management, who already knew everything anyway, but whatever. And
well, by the way, they always say the easiest way to make a problem disappear in a big company is to establish a committee or task force to go and look into it.
Right. And that's exactly what happened, called Project Pandora. Later changed by...
Project Pandora.
Later, the name was later changed by the compliance officer that was brought in at board level to Project Fred. For some reason, he didn't like the previous name. But most of all, I was observing what was going on. I was observing a board member binning 12, 13 bin bags full of information that wasn't being shred. Goodness only knows what the stuff that was being shred said, because a lot of what was in the bin bags was pretty bit of an indictment. And I was being invited to meetings by virtue of being on this committee with senior management, the management board, and I was hearing how the general counsel was being treated by the supervisory board. This is a Dutch company that has this ad hoc board above the management board, about not going down certain routes, not investigating certain countries, not going after certain individuals, including named board members. And it became very clear, very quickly, that the green shoots of cover-up were already there to be seen within literally days of our learning, because we'd been on the outside. We weren't supposed to know about the company's dark side.
Now, at the time, global corruption scandals were making headlines. Jonathan, well aware of the risks, closely followed reports of bribery at Walmart, specifically allegations that the company paid off Mexican officials to secure permits. He noticed how much scrutiny fell on Walmart's lawyers. Wanting to avoid that same kind of exposure, Jonathan took a proactive step, not out of altruism, but out of self-preservation. He hired a U.S. attorney and quietly reported what he had discovered at SBM to the Securities and Exchange Commission. He wasn't sure what would come of it, but he wanted a record that he had done the right thing, a way to protect himself if things ever went south. If you could go back today, and at the moment your boss gives you this news, had you handed in your resignation that day and walked away, would your life today still be perfectly pleasant and normal?
If I had done that immediately before I became vested in all this knowledge, then that would have been great. That would have been good.
You know, the reason I ask is so many of the stories that we've covered, very often it's those first 72 hours and that make a difference, but the problem is you don't know when the first 72 hours begins. It's only clear in hindsight. But I'm sure you've thought of this before. Had you walked out that day, had you known everything else that was going to transpire, what would have been?
Or had Jay, the general counsel, pirouette and go straight back out where he came from. I don't want to know anything about this. I don't want to be involved in this. I'm not part of the company's compliance. Please, naff off.
The goal was not to injure SBM. The goal was simply, let me document that I saw something and I said something.
Right. I didn't expect SEC to take the matter on board, to be honest. I suppose if they had, there could have been damage to SBM, but they chose not to. So I could wipe my hands of the matter and move on, free in the knowledge that I had parted with that information to a responsible third party.
Did you discuss any of this at the time with your wife? Did you let her know what the stress was going on at the office, or did you feel like you needed to shield her from that?
It was impossible because I was probably coming home looking like a nervous wreck. It was like crossing the trenches during World War One. It was something like I'd never experienced, would hope not to experience, or hope my worst enemies never to experience. Goodness knows what my blood pressure was like then. You know, I was walking into...
You thought you were going to go to jail?
Well, it was more walking into meetings, all of which, fortunately, I recorded. And you've got, the CEO talking about where are the more comfortable jails to go to, nervously laughing with the corporate secretary. A meeting we had with former head of sales and marketing, explaining, as if they didn't know, the bribes that we paid via the Brazilian agent, 2/3 of which went on to the high echelons of Petrobras.
So all of a sudden, you've been at a company nearly a decade. You thought you knew where you were working, thought you knew the business, and then all of a sudden, you've had your eyes opened and you're seeing an entirely other reality. That must have been jarring.
Right, so someone had to be the top dog, somebody had to be the best in the business, and it happened to be SBM, someone. And that's right. Obviously, I didn't see a future at the company, and yeah, I was devastated. And I'd been.
What did you sort of figure out then was your best case scenario? Like, if, in other words, you were gonna you went to the SEC, you became a whistleblower. In the best case scenario, how had you sort of thought about, like, okay, here's what this is going to mean for me. I'm not going to be able to work here any longer. I'm going to have to.
So the General Counsel had resigned in the April, so now I was effectively the acting General Counsel, which is the last thing I wanted to be. I wanted to leave, obviously, myself, but it was all about the timing. And it was made quite easy because I made mention earlier of a former Allen & Overy top lawyer on their management board, had been brought in to, at the board level, as a chief governance and compliance officer. And during a meeting, he effectively sacked me by saying we'd come to the end of the road. He didn't like how I was going about the investigation that I was participating in, working at the instructions of our US and Dutch external counsels. He then rallied back and said, well, you could stay, but not obviously work on the investigation, but I knew everything, as if that would be of any use. So that conversation happened at the end of May, so still very much 2012, and I left on the 6th of June. So I was due about 6,000 euros. In the end, got paid a much larger sum, but still less than a year's remuneration. And of course, that was hush money. So there was a particularly stringent confidentiality clause, or NCA, within the mutual termination agreement, basically making sure that I shut up, and I'd have to pay something like 25,000 euros a day until the breach ceased, which is kind of difficult if you've already blurted. But yeah, so I ultimately left in the June with this payoff, which, yeah, why was that money paid? Yeah, exactly.
Walking away from a company as tainted as SBM should have been simple, but for Jonathan, it wasn't. He found another job, this time in Perth, keeping his global career alive, but it was a lateral move, one that left him unsatisfied. Worse, his departure from SBM came with a strict non-disclosure agreement, making it impossible to explain why he had walked away from such a high-ranking position. A red flag for future employers, for sure. Frustrated, but ultimately ready to move on, Jonathan's lawyers negotiated with SBM for greater compensation, arguing that the NDA had limited his future prospects. That effort went nowhere, and that should have been the end of it. Until he received an email from SBM's Chief Governance and Compliance Officer, an email that would alter the course of his life.
And I received an email from Mr. Hepkemer, the said Chief Governance and Compliance Officer, saying, well done, very well done. You found a job with Harrowing. Jolly well done. It was very patronising the way it was worded, and then went on to say that there was a rumour that I'd been speaking in a bar in Singapore about things I shouldn't be. And it was politely reminding me of the confidentiality provisions in the mutual termination agreement. Now, I was trying to get SBM out of my mind. This was 9 months after I'd left. I had no intention of hitting the beehive, doing anything further in relation to SBM. I'd done my bit. But most unfortunately, that letter didn't go down well at all, given where I was and what I was doing and where I'd come to do what really was a subpar position. I wasn't even allowed to use the word legal in my job title. It wasn't obvious that I was legally qualified as a lawyer in the job. So
you were angry with them.
I was peeved. I was pissed off. And ultimately, if Mr. Hepkemer hadn't sent that letter, well, it would have saved the company almost $1 billion.
We may not be sitting here today.
A number of apologies and a number of imprisonments. Probably the least well scripted and advised email that man has ever sent. And we wouldn't be sitting here right now. True.
What happened next?
So I was now realising that I couldn't get back on track. I couldn't get the same sort of level of job that I had at SBM. Typically, a potential employer, they were kind of confused. So let me get this right. You left the palm-lined streets of Monaco with 3 young children and a wife, and without a job to go to, Mr. Taylor. Tell me, why would that have been? Why was that? And of course, I couldn't tell. I was not allowed to. And so interviews, didn't start and then continue very well because they thought there was something. What was wrong with this? Clearly, something wrong with this individual. Why would he do that? Why would he have gone without a job to go to? So I was.
Why would he leave a perfectly pleasant and normal life?
My hands were tied, and so I was getting nowhere in the career.
What did you want? Did you just want to lash out at them and be public about what they had done, or did you want something in return from them?
I wanted to be justly compensated on the basis that I couldn't get back on the job ladder or the sort of ladder that I was after as a result of this ridiculous position I was in, not being able to explain why I ever left SBM, and the suspicion that was aroused by interviewers. That's what I wanted, to be duly compensated.
When did you realize that you were being targeted?
So ultimately, I then blew the whistle again, if you will. And I went on Wikipedia and SBM's page and copied and pasted an 8-page document which I'd concocted, which was a summary, but a detailed summary at the same time of SBM's bribing activities that I knew about at the time, quotes from various officers of the company, taken from various meetings that I had attended. It was quite a read. I was in the middle of praising it before I put it online and thought, well, hang on, John. Before I put it online, before I continued this précis, it was taking a long time. Why don't you just try it out and see if it works? This copy and paste lark, will it work? Will it actually stay up there? And I copied and pasted, and about 4 seconds later, literally disappeared from the screen. So it turns out that the Wikipedia have sort of Wikipedia police, and they are notified probably electronically about large parcels of information being put on their websites, and it's like a self-policing mechanism, defense mechanism, and it's taken down and then considered before potentially being posted back up again, but this time by the Wikipedia police. Little known to me is that there's a history tab on Wikipedia, and every entry given to relating to the subject matter can be read in full by just clicking on the history tab and then clicking on the date and time of a previous entry. And so it was actually all there. And it's quite an indictment, to put it mildly, but I didn't know about what I just told you at the time. Got a call in about January, 4 months or so later, from a journalist making reference to information that was on that document. And I know the company had a version of it sent by my Monegasque lawyer, and I thought perhaps it had got loose within the company. But as things turned out, someone somewhere had found the version that had gone up and immediately been put down in the history, under the history tab, and had gone to Dutch news magazine, quote, and quote, they made a big meal of it, and the whole matter became extremely public very quickly.
SBM's corruption in South America, Africa, and the Middle East wasn't just an internal scandal. It was an international crisis. Investigations in the Netherlands, the US, and Brazil cost the company hundreds of millions in fines. High-ranking executives went to jail, and Jonathan played a critical role in making it all happen. Yet despite all of this, authorities in Monaco never filed a single charge against SBM. And in September 2014, SBM turned the tables, reporting Jonathan to Monaco's prosecutor's office for allegedly stealing documents and attempting to extort €3 million in exchange for silence. Now, Jonathan didn't learn about the legal action against him for another 3 years, but when he did, the consequences were devastating. To find out what happens next, join us for part 2 of the trials of Jonathan Taylor. Tune into the next episode of Targeted, where we will continue our conversation with Jonathan Taylor in part 2 of this harrowing story. Don't miss the conclusion to the story of a whistleblower facing high stakes, both personally and professionally. Targeted is a production of Next Chapter Podcasts. Please follow the show, subscribe, rate and review on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow me, Zach Abramowitz, on X at Zach Abramowitz, and subscribe to my Substack at legallydisrupted.com. To learn more about our guests and their stories, go to targeted.com.